everyone, my name's Anne and I am doing another lesson today. Last lesson I did science. The topic was acids, bases and salts. Today I'm doing English and the chapter is 3 questions from the Honeycomb textbook. I have some question answers here that we will be doing at the end after reading the chapter. Now, let's get on to the chapter. Here's the textbook. 3 questions. The thought came to a certain king that he would never fail if he knew 3 questions. These 3 questions were: what is the right time to begin something? Which people should he listen to? And what is the most important thing for him to do? These 3 questions, guys, you need to memorize them because in later questions, I'm sure there'll be questions. The king therefore sent messengers throughout his kingdom, promising a large sum of money to anyone who would answer these 3 questions. Many wise men came to the king, but they all answered his questions differently. In reply to the first question, some said the king must prepare a timetable and then follow it strictly. Only in this way, they said, could he do everything at its proper time. Others said that it was impossible to decide in advance the right time for doing something. The king should notice all that was going on, avoid foolish pleasures, and always do whatever seemed necessary at that time. Yet others said that the king needed a council of wise men. The meaning of council is right at the side here. A group of people chosen to give advice or to make rules. This was because one man would find it impossible to decide correctly without any help from others, the right time for every action. But then others said that there were some things which could be urgent. These things could not wait for the decision of the council. In order to decide the right time for doing something, it is necessary to look into the future, and only magicians could do that. The king, therefore, would have to go to the magicians. In their answers to the second question, some said that people most necessary to the king were his counselors. Counselors means members of the council. Others said the priests. A few others chose doctors, and yet others said that his soldiers were the most necessary. To the third question, some said science, others chose fighting, and yet others chose religious worship. As the answers to his questions were so different, the king was not satisfied and gave no reward. Instead, he decided to seek the advice of a certain hermit who was widely known for his wisdom. Hermit means a person who lives alone and leads a simple life. The hermit lived in a wood. Wood means a small forest, which he never left. He saw no one but simple people, so that the king put on ordinary clothes. Before he reached the hermit's hut, the king left his horse with his bodyguard and went on alone. As the king came near the hermit's hut, he saw the hermit digging the ground in front of his hut. He greeted the king and continued digging. The hermit was old and weak, and as he worked, he breathed heavily. The king went up to the hermit and said, "I have come to you, wise hermit, to ask you to answer 3 questions. How can I learn to do the right thing at the right time? Who are the people I need most? And what affairs are the most important?" Affairs is things, matters, or business. The hermit listened to the king, but did not speak. He went on digging. "You are tired," said the king. "Let me take your spade and work in your place." "Thanks," said the hermit, giving the king his spade. Then he sat down on the ground. This is the hermit, okay? And this is the king dressed in ordinary clothes. When the king had dug 2 beds beds, small patches of ground for plants. He stopped and repeated his questions. The hermit gave no answer, but stood up, stretching out his hand for the spade, and said, "Now you rest, and let me work." But the king did not give him the spade, and continued to dig. 1 hour passed, and then another. The sun went down behind the trees, and at last the king stuck the spade onto the ground and said, "I came to you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. If you can give me no answer, tell me so, and I will return home." "Here comes someone running," said the hermit. Why did the king want to know the answers to the 3 questions? He thought he would never fail in life. Messengers were sent throughout the kingdom to fetch wise men to find answers to the questions, to look for the wise hermit, to announce a reward for those who could answer the questions. And the first question answer is, so he would never fail in life. Okay. Now let's go on to the second part. The king turned round and saw a bearded man running towards them. His hands were pressed against his stomach, from which blood was flowing. When he reached the king, he fainted and fell to the ground. Fainted means lost consciousness. The king and the hermit removed the man's clothing and found a large wound in his stomach. The king washed and covered it with his handkerchief, but the blood would not stop flowing. The king redressed the wound until at last the bleeding stopped. Redressed is dressed again. The man felt better and asked for something to drink. The king bought fresh water and gave it to him. By this time, the sun had set and the air was cool. The king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut and laid him on the bed. The man closed his eyes and lay quiet. The king, tired by his walk and the work he had done, laid down on the floor and slept through the night. When he awoke, it was several minutes before he could remember. There's a picture of the king helping a wounded man and the hermit next to him. Where he was or who the strange bearded man lying on the bed was. Forgive me, said the bearded man in a weak voice, when he saw that the king was awake. "I do not know you and have nothing to forgive you for." "You do not know me, but I know you. I am that enemy of yours who swore revenge on you, because you put my brother to death and seized my property." Seized is took by force. "I knew you had gone alone to see that hermit, and I made up my mind to kill you on your way home, but the day passed and you did not return. So I left my hiding place and came upon your bodyguard, who recognized me and wounded me. I escaped from him, but I should have died if you had not redressed my wound. I wished to kill you, and you have saved my life. Now, if I live, I will serve you as your most faithful servant and will order my sons to do the same. Forgive me." Faithful is loyal and true. The king was very happy to have made peace with his enemy so easily and to have won him over as a friend. He not only forgave him, but said he would send his servants and his own doctor to look after him, and he promised to give back the man his property. Leaving the wounded man, the king went out of the hut and looked around for the hermit. Before going away, he wished once more to get answers to his questions. The hermit was on his knees, sowing seeds in the beds and that had been dug the day before. The king went up to the hermit and said, "For the last time, I beg you to answer my questions, wise man." "You have already been answered," said the hermit, still bending down to the ground and looking up at the king as he stood before him. "How have I been answered? What do you mean? Do you not see?" replied the hermit. "If you had not pitied my weakness yesterday and had not dug these beds for me, you would have gone away. Then that man would have attacked you, and you would have wished you had stayed with me. So the most important time was when you were digging the beds. And I was the most important man, and to do me good was your most important business. Afterwards, when the man ran to us, the most important time was when you were caring for him, because if you had not dressed his wounds, he would have died without having made peace with you. So he was not the most. He was the so he was the most important man, and what you did for him was your most important business. Remember then, there is only one time that is important, and that time is now. It is the most important time because it is the only time we have any power to act. The most necessary person is the person you are with at that particular moment. For no one knows what will happen in the future and whether we will meet anyone else. The most important business is to do that person good because we were sent into this world for that purpose alone. This story is by Leo Tolstoy and it's been retold. And I think that was a really interesting story. So to summarize this story, it's about this king who wanted to answer these 3 questions. What is the right time to begin something? Which people should he listen to? And what is the most important thing for him to do? So the king sent messages throughout his kingdom promising a reward for anyone who would answer these 3 questions. A lot of people, wise men, came to the king, but they all answered differently. So first question, so there was some people said to had timetable, it was impossible, or avoid foolish pleasures and always do whatever seemed necessary. Others said that he needed counsel of wise men, and one man would find it impossible to decide correctly without the help from others. But then others said that there would be things that which would be too urgent, that there wouldn't be time to wait for the decision of a council. So you need to look into the future, and only magicians could do that. For the second question, some people said that it was most necessary to the king's wise counselors or the priests. Others chose doctors, yet others chose soldiers. To the third question, some said science, fighting, or religious worship. All these questions was so different answers were given that the king wasn't satisfied and didn't give any of them any reward. So he decided to ask the hermit. So he went undressed with ordinary clothes and went to the hermit. He greeted the hermit. Greeted the king, and the king asked him these 3 questions. The hermit listened, but he didn't speak. He went on digging, and then the king said, "You're tired. Let me work for you." And then the hermit just said, "Thank you." After the king had do 2 beds, he asked the questions again, but still the hermit didn't answer and said to rest and give me it. But he didn't. He kept on digging, and then an hour passed, then another. Then the sun went down, and then I came to ask you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. If you cannot give me no answer, tell me so, and I will return home. And then the hermit said, someone comes running. And then this wounded man fainted and fell to the ground. The king washed and helped the wounded man, and then saved his life. The bearded man said, "Forgive me," and said that I sworn revenge on you, but because you put my brother to death and seized my property, but I will be your most loyal servant. And the king asked for the last time, to the hermit, asked for the last time, I beg you to answer my questions, wise man. And then the hermit says, you've already been answered, and then says that the most important time was when you were digging the beds. I was the most important man, and to do me good was your most important business. And remember, there is only one time, and that is now. And then he also said that when the wounded man came running to us, the most important time was when you cared for him, and he was the most important man, and what you did for him was your most important business. And that now is that there is only one time that is important, and that is now. And that because that is the time we have power to act. Okay? We have to do good for a person because we were sent into this world for that purpose alone. And that is the summary of the story. Let's answer some questions from this, okay? Many wise men answered the king's questions, but their answers were so varied that the king was not satisfied. Someone suggested that there should be a council of wise men to help the king act at the right time. Someone else suggested that the king should have a timetable and follow it strictly. The king requested the hermit to answer 3 questions. Excuse me. The king washed and dressed the bearded man's wound, but the bleeding would not stop. And these questions are in the textbook. I mean my PowerPoint. Three questions, working with the text. Why was the king advised to go to magicians? Some people said that the magicians could look into the future. The king wanted to know the right time to begin something, so they advised the king to go to magicians. In answer to the second question, whose advice did the people say would be most important to the king? In answer to the second question, the wise men had given different answers. Some said that the king's counselor's advice was important. Others thought that the priests were most important. A few others chose doctors and soldiers. The hermit's answer was the best. He said that the person present with the king was the only important person. His advice would be more important. What suggestions were made in the answer to the third question? In answer to the third question, some said science, others chose fighting, and yet others chose religious worship. To the third question, the hermit's answer was the best. He said that the most important affair is to do good to the person before you. The hermit believed that man was sent on earth for that purpose alone. Did the wise men win the reward? If not, why not? No, the wise men did not win the reward because the king was not satisfied with their answers. How did the king and the hermit help the wounded man? The king and the hermit removed the man's clothing and found a large wound in his stomach. The king washed the wound and covered it with his handkerchief, yet the blood kept on flowing. So the king redressed the wound. At last the bleeding stopped. After some time, the man felt better and he wanted to drink something. The king gave him fresh water. After this, the king and the hermit carried him into the hut and put him on the bed. Who was the bearded man? The bearded man was the king's enemy because the king had killed his brother and seized his property. Why did he ask for the king's forgiveness? The king had saved the bearded man's life, so the man felt grateful. to the king and asked for his forgiveness. The king forgave the bearded man. What did he do to show his forgiveness? To show his forgiveness, the king promised to help the bearded man. He promised to send his servants and his own doctors to look after him. The king also promised to give him back his property. Right, okay. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and that's about it. I read this full chapter to you all. I think it's a good, meaningful story. I told you the summary and I answered some questions as well. I hope you all enjoyed this. Revise this portion and practice reading, because reading is very important in English, especially when you're from India and you struggle with reading. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this lesson. Thank you, and see you in my next video. Bye.